Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give a couple minutes to let people file in.
Yeah, we had about 30 people registered, but it's an awful nice evening. We didn't know whether to start this earlier because of the fact that it gets dark later, or whether we should keep it at 6:30. We tried to figure out what the best thing to do was, so we went with 7 o'clock this time. Usually we meet at
Yeah.
6:30. But we thought people might be out enjoying the day.
Pretty nice day.
Was a
Gave me
little
time
cool,
to fly in, so that was good.
Oh, that's good.
little
that's
cool
good.
out there today, but not impossible.
Well, maybe people are going to straggle in.
Maybe they are. I know one person that registered asked me they wanted to see the tape, and we always say,
Yeah,
we
we
do
always-
record this and we get it out there to a variety of ways, so.
so it
do
may
get
be
to
that
watch it.
people registered and are just waiting for us to send them the
Could be.
recording.
And Terry puts it on her YouTube channel. I generally put it on my webpage. I think I've put most of them, if not all of them, if I remember to do it, so. So why don't we start,
Okay.
everybody? I think there's a lot of people on this call that know who Terry and I are, and we're really thrilled to have you. My name is Lauren Carson. I'm state representative for the great city of Newport. And today is the 1-year anniversary of the signing of the Act on Climate. There's our guest, Hank, up on the top, wearing his Act on Climate shirt, which was a memorable day. 1 year ago today, the governor came down in Newport and signed it down on the waterfront. And that was a great day. And as a result of the Act on Climate, I characterize it as that the gates have opened up and there's been a lot of activity moving through it in the state. There's been a lot of bills that have been introduced over the past 3 or 4 months. There's a lot of activity to really implement the act. And one of the major ways we want to implement the act is to really get at buildings, because the 3 major sources of emissions are buildings, electricity, and transportation. And so there's several bills on buildings and building resilience, which we're going to talk about tonight. And we have a couple of guests tonight, which I'm going to turn over to Terry. Just quickly, the Climate Caucus was somewhat of an invention of Terry's and mine, my colleague, Representative Cortvriend, and we also have my colleague from Portsmouth, Representative McGaw, with us. And we try to meet about every month or 8 weeks to go over an issue of interest relative to climate. And we're trying to engage our constituents on Aquidneck Island in climate-related activities and policy. So Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and good evening. I see most of our guests are regulars, so we're so happy to have you here this evening. And I'm Terry Cortvriend, the state rep for the southern part of Middletown and the east side, the southern part of Portsmouth and the east side of Middletown. And tonight we have Matt Ristica. I hope I did okay with your last name, and Hank Webster, whom Lauren already introduced. And these 2 guys are experts in the world of building codes and how to build efficient buildings and decarbonize them. And they're also experts in the policies that result in that. So you guys aren't actual builders, but you're policymakers that understand where the building codes need to go. And I want to do a quick commercial. I thought we might have more people on, but I wanted to just have you mark your calendars for the first Friday in May, which I believe is May 5th. At Innovate Newport, there's going to be
It's the 6th, Terry. It's the 6th.
Oh, sorry, May 6th, a celebration of Aquidneck Island Earth Week, which has become quite a thing. And the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus is a co-host with the organizers of Aquidneck Island Earth Week. And so Lauren and I were proud to be asked to help them organize and this celebration. And it'll be a little bit of policy brainstorming and a lot of socializing, I hope. So we hope you all can make it. And
It's at 5 to 7. I don't know if you said that. It's 5 to 7.
I did not say that, so thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. So with that, who shall we turn it over to first, Matt or Hank? Who's going first?
I think Matt, actually.
All right. I'm going to share my screen here. One sec. Oh, I'm disabled. Mike, can you?
Yep,
I'm
you
the
should
host
be the
now.
host now.
All right. Okay. Can we see that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Very cool. So I want to say I'm sorry. First, it's bedtime here, and I've got two kids that are 5 and 2. One of them's in my room right now. Hey, good night. Good night, Bubba. See you later. Say, yeah, I'm working. Sorry, buddy. Apologize. So my name is Matt Rustica. I'm the director of market transformation at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. I will explain who that is in just a minute. It's my job to kind of think about how we can align the public and private sectors on expeditious strategies for eliminating emissions from buildings. And I want to just first say thanks to Reps Cortvriend and Carson for inviting me to speak today. It's really nice to meet you. It's really nice to be here. So just a real brief outline. I'll introduce us, the VDC. I have a couple slides on the emissions inventory, just to kind of, set the stage. And then I'm going to talk about kind of two substantive areas. The first is, policy pathways for phasing out natural gas. And the second is just kind of a general kind of overview of how building electrification works. What are the kind of technologies that are involved? What are the considerations to bear in mind if you're thinking about installing some of this stuff at your house? So without further ado, the Building Decarbonization Coalition is a coalition of more than 200 stakeholders, which includes builders, designers, manufacturers, utilities, advocates, state and local governments, researchers, NGOs, all manner of kind of community-based organizations working together to chart a safe, rapid, and equitable transition away from the use of fossil fuels in buildings. Where we got our start in California. We have an office in New York, but we have staff all over. I myself am located in Situate, Massachusetts, the other Situate, so not too far away. So just very briefly, a couple of notes about emissions. So the Act on Climate Bill, as we've said, passed last year, requires that the state reach net zero emissions by 2050. And it's just going to be impossible to get there without dealing with buildings. You can see on this chart, this is, I apologize, from the EPA state inventory tool. It's not precise. It's not precisely the inventory that the state uses for its purposes, but it should be pretty close. Buildings represent about a third of emissions in Rhode Island. And I would hasten to point out that in this chart, the building slice, that 28%, is just the fuels that are combusted on site in buildings. It doesn't count any of the kind of grid emissions. And in Rhode Island, 91% of electricity is sold to residential and commercial buildings. So in fact, buildings kind of represent a plurality of the emissions in the state. And within that slice of kind of on-site fossil fuel use in buildings, most emissions come from burning natural gas. That wasn't always the case, as you can see in this chart. Rhode Island's on track for gas to represent about 2/3 of emissions from buildings by 2030, and 80% by 2050. In point of fact, that's just kind of like a simple trajectory. In point of fact, the transition is kind of happening a lot faster. Obviously, there's some pressure from the gas company for more people who are on oil to convert to gas or propane, and that's kind of happening at a pretty steady clip and has been for some time. Why is this important? Well, decisions that we make today are going to set this trajectory in stone. So heating equipment accounts for about 60 to 80% of fuel use in a given building, and it typically lasts more than 20 years. In Rhode Island, other Northeast states with old housing stock, it's not unheard of to see a boiler that's 30, 40, 50 years old, or even older than that. My dad lives in South Boston, and we did his boilers a couple of years ago, and they were manufactured in the Eisenhower administration, and they were still kicking. So the point is that plenty of the heating systems that are installed today in 2022 are still going to be kicking in 2050. when we're supposed to have kind of moved completely away from fossil fuels. And so it's really crucial that we start to bend this curve starting kind of today. And sorry, I'm also the emitter here. Rhode Island is not alone in this. So natural gas, which includes prominently the type of LNG that they're kind of bringing into Portsmouth now, is what's driving the growth in greenhouse gas emissions globally. And so there are it's kind of indisputable that this is like the big kind of elephant in the room. It's the thing that we really need to start to address as soon as possible. And there are a variety of policies and regulatory approaches that states can take to start phasing out gas in their jurisdictions. And again, you can imagine the kind of political difficulty of this. So it's really kind of like good that we're having this conversation, and great that Rhode Island passed the Act on Climate last year to open the gates, as Rep. Carson said. So as of right now, every piece of gas infrastructure that the gas company puts in the ground is financed as though it's still going to be in use 80 years from now in 2102. So by that point, Rhode Island will have long since had to stop using the pipes, 50 years before that. That's important because amortization schedules kind of reflect this timeline. So every mile of gas main that they put in the ground costs $1 million. And that money is kind of borrowed from the future. So when they install it, it's rate based, which means that every gas ratepayer pays for it over the course of its decades long lifetime. So if you look at your bill, if you have a gas account, you'll see a fixed kind of monthly minimum charge of $14. And that's you paying for the infrastructure. And the thing that keeps that cheap is that they're always adding more customers to the gas grid. What's going to happen, is that if Act on Climate is successful, and we hope it is, then people are going to start to opt out from gas for various reasons. And if there aren't any kind of overarching controls at the state level, that fixed cost, which has already kind of been spent and they're just collecting on the bills, for individual ratepayers, those costs are going to start to really increase. And that's going to accelerate and snowball, kind of like a combustible game of hot potato. And then the lowest income residents of the state are going to be left holding the bag. So this is just like a black hole of stranded assets that's like staring down the state right now. In the end, if nothing is done about this, then the state's going to have billions of dollars to kind of account for, right? Not necessarily the state. I mean, obviously the company owns it, but having given the company the franchise, it's kind of a messy situation. So the first step in addressing that kind of combustible problem is just to plan ahead. Some states have begun to do that already. In Massachusetts and New York, the PUCs, the DPS in New York and the DPU in Massachusetts. I'm always confused about this and I have to call Hank, but I think it's the DPUC in Rhode Island, have open dockets, which is like a investigation that the PUC does, that ask kind of what is going to happen to the gas distribution system under climate law. And this wasn't possible. There would have been no legal basis to do this before Act on Climate, but now that it's been kind of like, the bill has been passed, we're starting to figure out how to implement. Now's the time really to kind of like start this up. It's really necessary for an orderly transition. So leaving the marketplace to figure things out, as I said, will kind of lead to disaster. And this is just the first step. I think there's a big benefit to this that kind of is maybe secondary, but hard to kind of overstate the importance of, which is that it provides a forum for everyone to kind of air their concerns, set expectations, and then like at the end of the day, after hashing out all these big questions, you come out with some kind of an enforceable plan, a set of regulations maybe, or really, even just the sense that of market certainty to the marketplace, where contractors, other folks are going to actually implement building decarbonization measures, who are still a little unsure about what's going to happen, will kind of know for sure that this is coming and precisely when. So this is underway in other states. It's definitely a big tool, kind of a first step on a long journey type of a thing, where you can which you can use to kind of generate buy-in for whatever plan that you come up with. More concretely, there's another way to address emissions from gas-fired appliances, which is to limit them directly. So there are more emissions than just greenhouse gases. There are emissions that are regulated under the Clean Air Act. They're called criteria pollutants. They include things like carbon monoxide and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which is like, if you walk into a new building, it's got like that new material smell, that's VOCs. Those are regulated under the Clean Air Act. One of them is NOx, which is a way of referring to oxides of nitrogen. It's a precursor to smog. It's the thing that causes acid rain. And it's kind of causally linked to respiratory diseases, particularly childhood asthma. So it's kind of like a serious thing. NOx is regulated in every sector. There's a rule for every sector except buildings. Yet buildings produce about 20% of the NOx that Rhode Island sees in a given year. BDC is working on this. We're working with NESCOM, which is the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, to explore the idea of kind of setting regulations that are going to limit or eliminate NOx. There's no burning gas or any fuel without making NOx. So to ban NOx would be to ban gas. So there's that kind of like touchy element to this. NESCOM, as an organization, they kind of convene all the air regulators in New England, New York, New Jersey. So all the kind of like departments of environmental protection kind of go and talk to each other at NESCOM about air pollution rules. They've done a lot of work on transportation. They have a task force now on buildings. That's kind of their first foray into buildings. And I'm helping them with this. And I presented at the first meeting on March 29th. Rhode Island didn't send someone to that meeting. So that's someone to think about. It's really crucial that all states are represented in this process. It's a real serious kind of health issue. As I'll get into later, emissions that occur inside the home are actually not regulated at all. So all the Clean Air Act does is regulate outdoor emissions. But if you fill your house with NOx every day, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. So this is something that's kind of like being explored now, and that Rhode Island is, not only a part of. I hope to kind of be a part of. Hold on, letting somebody in here. So that's a concrete way to deal with gas. Ultimately, the issue with phasing out gas is that it kind of means existential change for this huge corporate entity with $350 million a year in revenue, which has had a state sanctioned monopoly for a century. It owns more than 3,000 miles of pipeline in the state. So it's just like this huge thing that needs to be kind of like dealt with somehow. And there's like everything, like every policy, there's a carrot side and there's a stick side, right? There's like an incentive, like let's sweeten the pot. And then there's like, a regulatory regime that you have to kind of force. And that is, the stick is, as I mentioned, that the gas company shouldn't be able to assume for the purposes of financing its infrastructure investments, that the pipes are going to be in use 80 years from now. So restricting how far out those depreciation schedules can be set will kind of fundamentally change the financial proposition of expanding the gas distribution system or even really maintaining it. The carrot, though, is that, and I should point out that Hank helpfully pointed out to me that Rep. Cortvriend has filed a bill that would kind of do a lot of this stuff. So thanks to Rep. Cortvriend for that. Let's hope that passes. But what I really want to talk about here is that there's a carrot side on the gas distribution system as well, which is that we really need to, now that we have Act on Climate in Rhode Island, right, we need to give the company something to do, because there's no selling gas and then remaining compliant with the law anymore, right? So in order to kind of avoid that like crashing, like stranded asset problem, we can do that by like reclassifying the gas company into a different type of company. a company that sells heat rather than selling gas, which is then used to make heat. So this is kind of like would be to ask the gas company to pursue new ways of providing heat to homes that doesn't involve burning fuel, that's renewable. And what that is called network geothermal. So they're piloting this in Massachusetts. They call it the GeoGrid network geothermal utility. They actually exist in a bunch of like college campuses and other big like hospitals and stuff around the country that have big like multiple buildings and low diversity, which I'll explain. So this is basically a huge heat pump that services a bunch of buildings at once. I'm just going to briefly explain how a heat pump works, real kind of basically, which is that underground, the temperature stays at about 55 degrees all year long, regardless of what the air temperature is outside. And so this, like any heat pump, it gathers that heat and then moves it inside. It kind of like concentrates the heat using a refrigerant, which is a gas that gets really hot under pressure. So it kind of like gathers the heat. It makes the refrigerant really cold. Heat moves to cold. It gathers the heat and then compresses it, makes it really hot, and then blows air over it inside the building like a furnace. And then that's how the heat gets kind of transferred in. These systems are 500-600% efficient. So you're getting like 6 times the heat energy in the building as you're using an electric energy to get it. So it's a significant kind of tool. It also happens to entail a lot of the same kind of skills and certifications that the pipe fitters that are working on the gas system now already have. So it's a way to kind of like bring some job security into this sector as we work to implement Act on Climate, as well as kind of bring people kind of healthier, safer, cheaper, totally renewable heat for their homes. And so the GeoGrid is one example of electrification. So in Rhode Island, electrification basically means replacing everything that's fossil fuel fired, space heating, water heating, cooking equipment with better electric versions. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about the electric strip heat that was popular in the 70s and the 80s. That's something that you kind of get a lot. New electric appliances, heat pumps, nothing like that. It's not even apples and oranges. It's like apples and dogs. They're just much better appliances. I have one in my own house, and I'm going to kind of go through the different ones. And if the hosts here are willing, I can't see anybody's face, but I'm happy to kind of take questions on some of this stuff if anyone has a question. So heat pumps, as I said, heat pumps are fully commercialized. They're available right now. Thousands and thousands or tens of thousands are installed each year in New England. Just in Maine, a small, extremely cold state, they do like 30,000 installations a year. And even if nothing changed on the grid, even if nothing changed, heat pumps would still reduce emissions. You can heat a house with a heat pump, or you can heat a house with a gas furnace. The heat pump uses less gas, even though the gas is being burned in a huge power plant, and then the electricity delivered, it's that efficient. Like less gas in absolute terms. I want to make one thing clear. So I'm not sure, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting many people in this group yet. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with heat pumps. But one big question you get all the time is, oh, they don't work in the cold. That's because in the 80s and the early 90s, there were product lines that didn't, they stopped working at, 30 degrees, 25, 30 degrees. And then they would just kind of shut off and people got left in the cold and it was a bad experience for everybody. That's not the case anymore. Don't believe the hype. People are going to trot this out all the time. Everybody is going to say this. Do not believe it. The gas company, the oil dealers, they don't trust heat pumps. But there are dozens, maybe hundreds of separate product lines that have been tested and proven to deliver, tested by the U.S. Department of Energy, and proven to deliver adequate heat to your home in temperatures as low as minus 34. And so just to put that into context, Rhode Island's a cold place. It's not Florida for sure. But heating systems in Rhode Island are designed to handle 3 degrees. That's kind of like what they call the design temperature. That's the temperature at which 99.6% of hours are warmer. So is it going to get down below 3 degrees? Yeah, every so often, but mostly not. And as you can see in this chart, minus 13, minus 15, minus 22. In the cases that can only reach minus 13, that's usually because they just haven't tested the system at a colder temperature. The room, there's like a special room they have to use to test, and they're extremely expensive. So only some companies have invested in it. So in point of fact, the likelihood that a heat pump installed in your house in Rhode Island isn't going to work on the basis of cold weather performance is vanishingly unlikely. The lowest temperature it's ever been in Rhode Island is minus 23.
Hey Matt, I just wanted to jump in, and so when it'll still work below 3, right? It just becomes less and less efficient.
So the 3 degree figure, that's the design temperature, right? So like, when a contractor comes into your house and has to decide like how big the system your house needs is, they do like a bunch of calculations based on like the age of your house and how big it is and how many rooms, and there's all kinds of like the different inputs they do, and the input for outdoor temperature, like so they know how cold does it get in this specific location, is 3 degrees. But as I said, there's most of these systems that are available, at least the ones that are cold climate rated, are still working at minus 22 or even colder than that. So it's just not the point I'm trying to make is it's not kind of a salient issue in Rhode Island. It would be in Duluth, right, or like Fairbanks, but not Rhode Island. I see Michelle had a question about gas. So natural gas versus propane, just very briefly, propane is like a byproduct that results from, it's like a worse version of natural gas that they capture and then tank up. So like you probably have a propane grill, some people do. You see propane a lot in rural areas as a heating fuel. Most equipment that's made for natural gas also works with propane with like a couple of minor modifications that they do routinely. Propane's just kind of like, it doesn't come to you via a pipeline. It comes in a tank and you have to go pick it up. And it's also like twice as expensive.
I'm sorry, this is Michelle. I'm just bringing that up because I know that was part of the pushback in one of the bills that we were hearing. We were hearing from the propane company about how much cleaner it was than natural gas. So thanks
Yes.
for.
I was going to
striking.
ask that question too, because all the commercials these days talk about how propane is the clean fuel.
Oh, that's really weird. It's not. So propane makes 139.1 pounds of CO2 per million BTU. A home is going to burn probably 60 to 80 million BTUs for heating every year. And natural gas makes 117 pounds.
And same with the NOx. Does the propane create more NOx in the home? And I'm asking because I still have a propane stove.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I can look it up for you. So propane it's rare enough that the EPA doesn't have a ton of documentation about propane NOx.
Okay.
Mostly because, as I said, buildings are unregulated in terms of NOx.
Right.
And you don't see propane being used in like these big industrial boilers and stuff that are currently regulated under the Clean Air Act. But yeah, I'm not totally sure. I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by clean.
Right.
Clean compared to oil.
Well, they're saying, has no methane, and anyway, anything that you can send us that compares the two, because I will tell you that they've been a very strong voice in opposition. So anything, saying that they should be excluded. So anything that you have that you can share with us would be helpful.
I'll follow up on that. One thing I'll say is that, there's propane has less heat in it, for per gallon of propane. There's much less useful heat than there is in an equivalent quantity of oil or gas. So you have to burn more of it to get what you need from it. And that makes it really expensive. As I said, like on average, more than twice as expensive as natural gas. and more expensive than oil, more expensive than anything. It's like the most expensive fuel. And so I don't know the answers to these questions because in the past it's just been like, well, it's so expensive, and it's true. So, but I'll follow up on that.
Thanks.
Okay, so real quick, I'm going to get into some of the specific technologies here. All the models that I was talking about before, the -22, -34 kind of, models that were on the last slide, those are all air source heat pumps. So as I said, what a heat pump does is to move heat around rather than generate it. And that makes them super duper efficient. Air source heat pumps means that the heat that they're harvesting is from the outside air. So they take heat from the outside air in the winter and then they move it inside. Normal air conditioners, whether it's a central air conditioner or a window unit, those are also heat pumps. They're just one-way heat pumps. The ones I'm talking about go both ways. They heat and they cool. The reason why this unit can get heat out of the air, even if it's 0 degrees or -10 degrees, is because, as I said, heat moves to cold, and the refrigerant that's in the coil that's inside that box is at like -50 degrees. So even if it's 0 degrees outside, there's like, it still sucks heat from that air. There's always heat unless it's absolute zero. So that's how it works. It's a very advanced appliance that didn't exist 15 years ago, but now it's common. So just as a point of comparison, the best gas heating system reaches about 98% efficiency on average. The ones that are installed are like 87% efficient. 98% is close to the limit allowed by physics for that type of system. So you're like burning gas to heat either water in the case of a boiler, or a heat exchanger, which is like a piece of hot metal in the case of a forced air system. And there's always gonna be a loss there. By contrast, air source heat pumps can be 300% efficient or more, depending on the time of year. In a place like Aquidneck Island, a lot of homes are kind of on the older side. And that means there's not going to be a lot of room for ductwork. I mean, I'm sure some people have made it happen, but it's extremely expensive and pain in the neck. Most of the highest performing air source heat pumps are actually ductless, and you've probably seen some of these. It's like the big, white box hanging like near the ceiling. You see them a lot in restaurants and increasingly in people's homes. Those only require kind of 1-inch copper pipe. So that unit is called the compressor. It's outside. They run this one copper pipe in. It goes into all the inside heads. They call that big white box. And you don't have to do any ducts at all. It just runs the refrigerant straight in. If you're thinking about adding air conditioning, going with one of these systems is actually a really super good move. On the air conditioning side, they're like 2 to 3 times as efficient as a central air conditioner. They're way more efficient than a window unit. And if you're adding air conditioning, you can kind of get you can get the air conditioning and it's really efficient. And then you can also get a heating system that's going to like eliminate carbon monoxide poisoning from your house forever. So it's a pretty good deal. 0 emissions on site, quieter, very quiet, healthier. You're on Aquidneck, your cooling load, like your air conditioning, energy per year is going to be about 60% of your heating. So a lot of people kind of start by doing like all of their cooling and 60% of their heating, and then they can kind of get comfortable with the product and then like add the last 40% later. That's something that happens a lot. So air source heat pumps aren't the only kind of heat pump. There's also ground source heat pumps. They can be a lot more expensive. They're also probably not going to work in Newport where it's really dense. You need to dig trenches or drill vertical wells. The wells go down like 150 feet. That's what these guys are doing in the picture. They're kind of a luxury product, but you do see them a lot in larger buildings, big multifamily buildings, schools, stuff like that, like especially newly built buildings, or in rural areas. Sometimes they can kind of drop the coils into a body of water like a pond instead of into the ground, which can kind of reduce the cost. The network geothermal system that I talked about before is a kind of ground source heat pump. It takes heat from the ground, moves it into the building. In the summer, it takes heat from the building and moves it into the ground. Heating is most of the energy for your homes on Aquidneck. but there's also a heat pump for hot water. This picture is of a heat pump water heater. Not all the models require that kind of ductwork that's there. It's only in certain situations that you need that. Mine, for instance, is not. Those are usually marketed as, you'll see them listed as hybrid electric water heaters, usually not heat pump water heaters. They're basically a regular electric heater with a little heat pump thing on top. So if you look at the picture, that little top part with the black like control panel, like there's a little heat pump in there. Mine has like a heat pump only mode, and then there's a hybrid mode. So if you're like drawing a bath or like using a lot of water in a given day, like the hybrid mode will give it a little more oomph. And then there's a vacation mode for when you're not around. The financial savings from using one of these things can be pretty significant, even with respect to gas. $100, $150 a year, depending on the quantity of water you use. I have 2 little kids, so I do laundry like twice a day. I'm saving. I've noticed, I'm saving quite a bit of money by using one of these. They need, it should be said, they usually need a new electric line. They don't come in. There are like 120 volt units that you can plug into a regular receptacle, but they're not common. So normally you have to do some electrical work. It needs to be like wired onto the panel. I think I'm going on a little bit too long, so please let me know if I'm boring you to tears here. And I mean that. But the last place you see fossil fuels being used in the home, but I think maybe the most important, definitely the most visible, is the kitchen. So gas stoves, everyone loves gas stoves. Gas stoves are great. Whatever. I mean, recent research recently, right, has begun to demonstrate the negative health impacts of burning gas in your living space. So as I said before, it was surprising when I learned this, that the EPA doesn't regulate indoor emissions. It only regulates emissions that are outdoors. There was a study 2 years ago, last year, by RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, and Physicians for Social Responsibility. They did a kind of literature review, and they found that cooking a roast in a gas oven produces an amount of nitrogen dioxide that exceeds the federal outdoor limit by 3 times. So if you're like doing a pork roast for Christmas, your air quality is so bad it would be federally illegal if it took place outside. And as I said earlier, nitrogen dioxide, it's a NOx. It's causally linked to childhood asthma. It's linked to respiratory impairments like COPD. If you've had COVID and it didn't go well for you, this is going to exacerbate that. And again, it's also the thing that causes acid rain. So, generally not kind of a good thing to have around. That brings me to induction. People love their gas stoves. They think they're kind of more responsive than the coil surface electric stove. That's probably true. But they're not more responsive than induction. That's just preposterous. My induction range, which I was fortunate to get as like a scratched and dented model in like this like back alley appliance store, boils a quart of water in 60 seconds. I showed my mother that. I thought she was going to die. She was astounded. So they're still pretty expensive, but you can buy countertop versions. You can buy like 1 hob, 2 hob, like 2 burner kind of countertop induction cooktops, or you can, like, if your house has like a cooktop that's not on top of your oven, you can pretty easily like kind of replace the gas one or propane one with an induction one. And those are cheaper. The hobs you can get for like $60. Some libraries have had programs that kind of rent them out so people can give them a try. This is something we're kind of actively working on. There's not a lot of financial assistance for these things outside of California, but they work really well. And we're just kind of trying to spread the word because they're just cool and they don't have pollution. I want to briefly just touch on something that I personally have been yapping about for a decade, which is intensely important, I think, for enabling cost savings for individual homes and businesses. After decarbonization and reducing strain on the grid, that's weatherization. That's what this guy is doing. He's weatherizing. What we usually mean by that is insulation and air sealing. I don't mean like windows, although that can be considered a weatherization measure. I don't mean like taking all your siding off and doing a whole big thing on the outside, like just real basic run-of-the-mill weatherization that they do in the national grid programs now. There's an incentive program in every state of the Northeast that's going to pay for the bulk of that work, should you choose to have it done. There are kind of like impediments, if you live in a house, like there are a number of houses in Aquidneck that were built in like the 18th century, and those can be kind of hard to weatherize for various reasons. But that notwithstanding, I mean, it's a opportunity to like kind of reduce strain on the grid, make homes more comfortable, save people money, and it can also really kind of reduce the upfront cost of a heat pump system. So you're going to pay more upfront if your heat pump system needs to make more heat. So if you reduce the amount of heat that you need, you can put in a smaller heat pump, and that is going to save you thousands of dollars. Research that I've done when I was working with Hank, that's published in a blog by Synapse Energy Economics, suggests that the least weatherized 20% of homes are responsible for half of residential emissions. These homes just kind of use more fuel per square foot. They're losing heat too fast through the roof, under the door, around the joists. And by the same token, they kind of cost more to keep comfortable in the hot weather or in the cold weather. So those are the kind of homes we need to decarbonize the most. Those are the ones that are going to cost the most to decarbonize. And as a result, weatherization is like the most important intervention you can make. Those homes that people are paying more than average in absolute terms for heat, they're also more likely to be, to house low and moderate income households. They're more likely to house language isolated households. They're about 85% rented. So these are the groups that have kind of historically not had good access to energy efficiency incentives. And to decarbonize buildings in Rhode Island, it's going to be really necessary to reach them, which means reforming the efficiency programs to focus on the right things in the right places. As I said, big part of that is weatherization. And that brings me to rebates and other incentives, the availability of which is going to really make or break the effort to decarbonize buildings in the state. As of today, the efficiency programs in Rhode Island, which are really the only source of any kind of assistance for homeowners or business owners that want to decarbonize their building, the programs are prohibited under the law from offering incentives for fuel switching, which is to say that if you have a gas thing, like an old kind of clunky gas furnace that's been belching carbon monoxide into your home all winter, you can get a big rebate to replace that with another gas furnace. But you cannot get a rebate to replace it with a heat pump under the program, right? There's like, they've plugged that hole a little bit with Reggie funding in Rhode Island, is my understanding. But formally, you can't incentivize this under the programs, which is a problem, because if people are going to do this, there's an incremental cost to it. It costs a little bit more than just doing business as usual. And there needs to be some sort of like way to, incentivize homeowners, incentivize contractors, distributors to like get on the ball, get more heat pumps installed. It's great. You can kind of get a rebate to replace an inefficient electric equipment like the baseboard with a heat pump. But as I said, to meet the climate targets, you really have to start making heat pumps affordable for people, and that means changing the programs. There's also a bill that does this that Hank sent me last week, to reforms the least cost procurement statute to allow strategic electrification. They're doing it in other states. In Massachusetts, you can get like $10,000 per home. Same utility company. So that's kind of like a next step in Rhode Island. And finally, I just want to kind of point out, there's a positive case to be made about electrification to the electric company, unsurprisingly. I mean, it sounds obvious, but they don't act that way. So about 2/3 of National Grid's revenue in Rhode Island is from the electric business as of 2020. So you'd think that kind of growing that business would be seen as kind of beneficial. There's a utility out in California, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD, that's done the math, and they've shown that electrification can actually reduce electric rates. So getting the grid ready for all these heat pumps and electric vehicles and all that kind of stuff, it's going to cost money, more wires and stuff. But those costs are going to be spread out over so many more kilowatt hours that the cost per kilowatt hour is going to go down. So like you're paying like 25 cents a kilowatt hour now in Rhode Island. That could go down, significantly as a result of electrification once it kind of gets scaled up. So to sum up, right, consumers can save more money. The electric utility makes more money, even though consumers are saving money. We all get central air conditioning. Fewer kids get asthma. There's no more carbon monoxide poisoning ever again. And we can make spaghetti in half the time, while eliminating a third of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. So that is it for me. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Matt. That was very informative, very informative. Hank, you want to take over and tell us what it means to us here on the ground?
I'd be happy to. And if Mike can just make me host really quick so I can.
I think Matt will have to do that.
Oh, and Matt, if you can make me host.
How do
Matt.
I do that?
If you go under Hank's name under participants, and then next to drop down from more.
Make host.
Yep.
There we go.
Thank you.
Matt. That was really interesting.
All right. I don't know if I'm host because it's saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
There's two Hanks too. We have you.
Oh, did I
with your-
Make the other one. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, and the
Okay.
other thing I wanted to do was represent recognize our colleague.
Hank, the other.
Representative Kislak.
Sorry, Lauren. Sorry,
She's
Lauren.
joined us. I just wanted to say we have another member of the House with us, Representative Kislak. So I wanted to recognize her.
Good
Hank,
evening,
the other
Rebecca.
Hank will have to make you the host.
I'm sorry. I I didn't know there was one.
Okay. Who's the other Hank?
It's me. It's an audio thing. So
Oh.
just bear with me for 1 second while I do it.
While you make yourself the host?
In the
I was-
meantime, I just want to say thank you to Matt. I thought that there was
Yeah.
so much really helpful information, and I do have a lot of questions, but I think probably what I'll do is I'll send you an email because I have a lot of, thoughts about what you had to say, and then wondering what some of these changes, what they would look like, how we would address that. So
Absolutely. I dropped my email address in the chat. Anyone on the
Great.
call, feel free to email me any questions at all. I'm happy, to help.
I was trying to take a picture of my
Heat pump?
my mini split,
Saw that,
but
I
it
saw that.
wouldn't let me paste into the chat. But I did take a film. I filmed when they were installing my heat pump system. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to share that. Maybe when I send out the recording of this, I'll include that as well.
Okay, Hank.
All right, thank you so much, and apologies for that. As we work from remote locations more and more, my apparatus has increased in size, and now I have too many screens to be able to manage effectively. So apologies for that. But my name is Hank Webster. I'm the Rhode Island director of Acadia Center. I've been lucky enough to present to the caucus before, and so it's nice to be back. And thank you for having me. And always a pleasure to follow up on Matt's wisdom. Matt was at Arcadia Center, and I learned so much from him. So I'm really glad that you got to hear directly from the source. But I can supplement that with talking about some local intersections with this issue. All right, now I can't get my screen to advance. Oh boy. Okay, here we go. Now we're cooking with induction. All right, these are just some introductory slides about Acadia Center. I will skip over those, but I'm happy to share the whole deck after the presentation. There's a few upcoming opportunities in Rhode Island related to the heating sector, and specifically heat pumps. And one thing I wanted to highlight up front was that the current state budget, which is going through the General Assembly, it's not finalized yet, so this is still just a proposal. But the budget does propose using $37 million in federal funds to kickstart Rhode Island's heat pump deployment. As Matt mentioned, a lot of our neighboring states are well ahead of us in this, and he mentioned Maine, which has been putting in tens of thousands of these for years successfully. They have a goal of 100,000 over the next 5 years. So clearly the technology works. It is beneficial for Mainers, and so it will be beneficial for Rhode Islanders too. So that is a good start to the program, but we'll need much, much more over time. And it needs to be paired with other complementary policies like energy efficiency and weatherization, and obviously slowing down or stopping the expansion of the gas network at the same time. The state is seeking public comment on how they should design that heat pump adoption program. The public comment window is through April 29th. So I just included that, and there's a link to that opportunity in the slide deck, and I'll put it into the chat afterwards during discussion. The other piece that I wanted to talk about was since it is the 1-year anniversary of the signing of the Act on Climate, and one of the things that law did was it required the state to update its 2016 climate strategies by the end of this current year. So by the end of 2022, the state will be required to release an updated plan, and we are working as advocates. There's a network of us, and we're trying to stay in touch with legislators as much as possible. But the state is seeking plan input. There is a whole process which you can follow at the link that's provided here. There is a specific set of sessions to look at what to do about the heating sector. You saw the pie chart that Matt presented earlier in the evening about all the different sections, transportation, buildings, electric generation, industrial, et cetera. And so they're setting this up so that each month's public discussions with stakeholders, and it doesn't have to be, advocates or organizations, it's including individual citizens and anyone who has an interest. They have specific sessions on June 14th and June 15th to discuss how to reduce emissions in the building sector. And so a lot of what Matt talked about, a lot of the legislation that's been introduced that I will talk about in a few minutes, those are all great strategies, and we'll have to understand, what's going through the assembly, what will be completed by that time, what we'll still need to do for the remainder of the year, and also in the years coming to start turning the ship on greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. I also wanted to share just a couple of clean heating resources. The top one is an Arcadia Center resource that Matt wrote when he was on our team. And it's called Clean Heating Pathways. And so it goes through a lot of information about how to decarbonize the heating sector, good information about heat pumps, about the need to stop the expansion of gas systems, policy interventions that one could adopt if they were trying to pursue that course. So that's a good report. Another is the Rhode Island Heating Sector Transformation Report. So a couple of years ago, the state undertook a public process to understand the emission sources from the heating sector. So to know, how many buildings were using oil heat, propane heat, natural gas, electric resistance, electric heat pumps, and all the strategies that are associated with that, and also looking at future technologies and future possibilities that might be also helpful to decarbonize the heating system. I think one of the key takeaways that we had from that was that the proceeding on a pathway of decarbonizing through electrification, through efficient electric heat pumps, was the most reliable and likely the most cost effective, because if we stay on the model of burning something for heat, the costs of trying to make that something decarbonized continue to escalate and escalate and escalate, and there's limited resource potential for that. So it's going to be increasingly hard to get what the industry is calling renewable gas or biogas. It's going to be increasingly expensive to try and generate hydrogen, which they're also saying could be used in building heating. And also the part that they don't say is that if we switch to trying to use hydrogen, that means that they get to replace all of the pipes, because the current pipes cannot be used for hydrogen. It is too small of a molecule and it will escape. So that's really part of the conversation that they're hiding, because it's beneficial to them to be able to construct all this new equipment. Plus, you would need to replace all of the appliances in your home. That's another cost that is not included in their figures. So electrification is certainly the most reliable pathway. Sure, there's some exceptions, industrial uses, you know, we can figure those out, but by and large, electrification is the most reliable, and it all is technology that's available today, and the cost will continue to come down as things scale, as Matt said. The final resource I wanted to just kind of highlight was a energy efficiency maximum potential study. That is something that the state paid for. It identified all of the opportunities to save energy and reduce emissions through energy efficiency measures, including weatherization. And so the big takeaway from that was our programs could probably about double in size and to achieve all of the technical potential out there. And that's an annual planning process that Arcadia Center and many other stakeholders are involved in, trying to push the utility and the regulators in that direction, because it's the most cost-effective, reliable pathway forward to reduce energy consumption across the board. For the last 10, 20 years, we've seen incredible savings in lighting as we've transitioned from incandescent to phosphorescent and then to LED. But now, you know, that kind of resource is kind of tapped out. And so we really need to turn and look at making people's homes more comfortable and keeping that thermal envelope better sealed, and transitioning to electrified heating and air conditioning. Air conditioning is already electrified, but electrified HVAC. And just wanted to touch on some of the buildings legislation this year. This has been a historic year in terms of legislation being introduced, which is fantastic. But this is just a small sampling, and I want to highlight that obviously there's the Aquidneck Island Caucus, as well as Providence. I don't want to give Providence too short shrift. I see Rep. Kislak on, so you know, it's a fantastic caucus for pushing forward important environmental legislation that will get us to the Act on Climate requirements. So here's a few, the Green Buildings Act that updates existing law to make sure that public funds being used on buildings, public buildings, make sure that they're LEED certified. The Home Heating Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Act, which Matt mentioned earlier, will help to wean us off of gas and move to a decarbonized heating future. There's a Clean and Healthy Schools bond, so that is something that will be on the ballot. As long as the legislature approves it, it will be on the ballot this November, and hopefully everybody approves it. But that is looking at our school sector specifically to make sure that those buildings are clean and healthy and safer. There's legislation to disincentivize the growth of the gas system. There's legislation to reform the energy efficiency program so that we're going after those heating and air conditioning savings that Matt described earlier that are currently prohibited in some of our laws. And so we really need to update and reform the laws for the next 20 years of energy efficiency. And so that bill does that. Rep. Kislak's building reporting standards bill will help us better understand the energy usage in buildings and then take actions to improve that. So if you think as a prospective tenant for any building or buyer of any building, you often don't know what that energy consumption is going to look like, and that's a huge ongoing cost. So this would be a first step in making sure that we're having at least insights into that. Kind of like when you see on the sticker of a car, the miles per gallon, you at least go into it knowing what you're getting into. You don't get that with buildings today. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the state budget, which is an annual opportunity for improving some of our emissions. But there's three major points that I want to mention there. I already spoke about the heat pump program. A second is obviously a big focus of this year's budget is building out affordable housing, which we absolutely need to do. There's a way to do that so as a low energy building or zero energy building. And that is a really, really big benefit for whoever's owning or living in that building, because then the utility costs, if you build the buildings right, will be really low. or 0 if you also put solar on top. And Matt's done some research here too. And it's, you know, if we stop and do things the right way, we can really make our challenge over the next several decades of emissions reduction a lot easier. And finally, there is an energy efficiency provision in the budget that Arcadia Center opposes, and that would scoop about $6 million in energy efficiency funds from ratepayers. We like the intent because it would go to pay for state climate action generally, but we don't want to see that being done on the back of just ratepayers, because it doesn't touch oil or propane users. It doesn't touch gasoline and diesel in transportation. So it's just not the right way to fund important state climate activities. And a final note, just because this is Aquidneck Island, and you all are aware of the ongoing saga about the LNG facility on Old Mill Lane. Quick update, late last week, National Grid filed their preferred solution before the Energy Facility Siting Board, and it is same as their previous solution, or their current solution, to address the fact that they connected more gas customers than their gas infrastructure could accommodate. So they want to continue using that LNG facility on Old Mill Lane into the future, into perpetuity on a seasonal basis. They estimate that it'll cost $15 million up front to make some renovations to the site, and $1.5 million every year ongoing. And if you look at this chart, this is just one of the charts from the report they filed. We're still digging through it, but you can see that the bar on the bottom, that is a solution that Arcadia Center proposed under Matt's tutelage. That would be basically enact a moratorium, so we're not expanding the gas system, and then use energy efficiency demand response programs, so that at peak times you're encouraging people not to use gas that can, you know, avoid it for a limited time, and electrification. And you see that's the only bar that's actually making a big difference on emissions reduction. Up at the top is their baseline of just doing what they want to do. Actually, that's not true, because if they had their way, they would continue to expand gas use. So we can talk more about that on another call. I don't want to dig too deeply into that, because this is about, you know, all of the different solutions. But I just wanted to point out that when we're looking at options to meet the Act on Climate targets, it's a no-brainer. There's no other real feasible way to get there at scale. So, and this is just contact information, and excited to get to questions now. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Hank.
And you guys can share the decks with me so I can send them out to our the people that signed up. and the
Absolutely.
People are here. Great, great. Thank you. Thanks, Hank. Questions? Anybody out there with questions?
That was a lot of information. That was a lot of information. It was terrific information and easy to understand, but nonetheless, it really sets your sights thinking a whole new way about things, right?
I've got one for Hank. And I'm wondering about on your slide about the 7 bills that are active, that have been filed right now. Do you have a sense as to, you know, and the number that stuck in my mind here from the earlier slide was the 28% of the building, you know, the building sector's 28%. Do you have any sense on these 7 bills as to how much each one impacts the 28% number, or maybe what priority order these need to be addressed in?
Question.
And do these get us to the target? If these bills pass, are we on cruise control?
That is a great question. Hard to quantify in real time, but I will venture a rough estimate, or at least maybe a qualitative analysis that is a little more firm than the quantitative. But when I look at these things, and Matt knows this just as well, so feel free to chime in, but you know that you can look at the problem in slivers of that pie. And so one sliver is new buildings that will be constructed, right? And that's the that's the easiest slice to address, because it's easy to build these buildings to an all electric standard, make them really energy efficient. Doesn't cost extra money doesn't take extra time. It just takes experience and know how to do it, and an emphasis on doing it. So that helps remove that problem off your plate going forward. So I think that is a really important one to get enacted quickly. I would say probably the bill that would potentially address the biggest number of homes, whether it's gas, oil, or propane, would be the energy efficiency reforms. As far as, if we can accelerate growth of those programs and break down some of the siloed nature of our energy efficiency programs, remove some of the restrictions in place, that has potential to benefit, every building in Rhode Island that either has or hasn't gone through the energy efficiency programs already. So in terms of scale, that one, might address the most, but I don't know if it's on deck to get passed this year. It's the first year it was introduced. We don't have a Senate companion for it yet. It's, we've got 2.5 months left in the session. So, we have to be realistic about that as well. I think the building reporting standards is a way to change the culture around buildings so that people are understanding when they're getting into it. And also it'll help set a baseline and gather data about which buildings need the interventions the most, because right now we're only getting that through the energy efficiency programs. And a lot of times we're getting the information, but we run into some kind of, weatherization barrier like lead paint or asbestos. And we have the information about the building, but we're not doing anything about it. But we don't have, a comprehensive analysis of all the buildings in the state in that way. And, I really want to advocate strongly for measures that disincentivize the utility company's incentive to continue expanding the gas system, because again, that's one that if we can stop that, at least we can then turn our attention to working on retrofitting buildings and all of those more complicated interventions. I just said a lot, Matt. I don't know if you had any additional insights or any of the legislators that have sponsored amazing legislation want to make a pitch, but we need them all. So it's hard.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, we need them all. It's like the buildings are difficult, and it's a big problem. It's the closest thing to people. So politically, it's really kind of perilous and needle thready. And, as a result of that, you got to tackle it from a bunch of different ways. And that's what we see in these bills, right? Like just all the different facets. I do want to say, so you said like, oh, what's the kind of like bang for your buck carbon wise? One thing I didn't get into is methane leakage, right? So a lot of these gas grids in the Northeast are very old. In the cities, sometimes the pipes are actually made of bricks. They're pretty bad. And on a 20-year timeline, leaked methane is like 86 times worse than carbon dioxide. So it's, some of the estimates have like, 3% of all the gas that enters the pipeline system leaking out before it gets to an end user, which is a huge issue. Sorry.
I have a question for you on that, Matt, because the original draft of the bill that I put in for the greenhouse gas emissions addressing heating systems had a whole section on methane leaks and pipes because it was modeled after Massachusetts. And after meeting the PUC folks, staff at the PUC assured me that Rhode Island was not Massachusetts and that the state of our pipes was in much better shape and that they were right on top of this and that I didn't really need that section in the bill. So I would love for you to comment on that. Was I naive to swallow that? This bill was so big that because it had a labor piece initially, it was modeled off of Massachusetts. And so I was just looking to pare it down for the first year to throw the idea out there to get people thinking about it. But if I reintroduce this next year, I guess what I'm hearing you say that I should have left that in there.
I'm actually looking at the numbers right now. Yeah, I mean, it's about half PVC. Let me see. I hope that's the case. I can't say I know for sure. I hope that's the case. I would say that in every jurisdiction, what studies have shown is that most leakage comes from like a small number of super leaking sites. And so depending on how they're tracking it at the DPUC, they might just not be capturing that. I don't know if they're, I don't know how they know what they know. But I'd be interested to kind of find that out. It's in other states where they've studied this, Boston, Seattle, Chicago, I think is another study. They found that, they do like a sampling method on the ground, and then they measure in the air at the same time. And so they kind of compare the two. And they've found that, the actual leakage exceeds the official estimate in every instance. But again, I can't say for sure if that's the case in Rhode Island. It does look like there's a lot of PVC, which wouldn't leak as much as other types of pipe.
Yeah, and like Matt said, I mean, there's what they know, but there's an entire universe of leaks that they probably don't know about. Either they haven't been large enough, or they haven't been reported yet, or they got reported, but the company assessed them as too minor to address. So they're still leaking into the atmosphere, but they're not hazardous in the moment in their estimation and according to federal guidelines. So, and then the other thing is, and we've kind of hit this theme a couple of times, is the studies and the science that we keep evolving on methane emissions in particular. So there's recent studies out that show, aside from the leakage that's happening throughout the distribution network through the pipes, your stoves or other appliances might actually be leaking even if there's nothing wrong. So you could get leaks through a bad connection behind the stove or somewhere else, but also just when your burners are off, it's emitting methane. Not hazardous levels, but it's still happening, and in the aggregate you can understand how that adds up really quickly. So we need to address that really, really badly.
There's also part of that is what they call a burp, right? When you start up an appliance, it'll just kind of like burp a little bit of methane. And there have been estimates that kind of is like 15% of all the leaked methane is just from those burps that take place in your house. All very recent though, like Hank said.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Hank, can you or Matt, can you tell me, like, going back to the 28% again, how big a piece of the 28% is methane leaks?
That actually isn't reflected in the inventory. So the EPA assumes a 1% leakage rate for the whole kind of supply chain as when it gets into the state, but that may or may not be accurate in a specific state. In Massachusetts, we found that it isn't. It's significantly, the actual leakage rate is 3 times that. But the leakage it's baked into the natural gas part of that 28%, that 1% leakage estimate, but anything over and above that isn't reflected.
Yeah, but if I understand right though, Matt, you said that the 1% leakage, that the methane is much more, has a much bigger effect on greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
it would be more than just 1% out of the 28%, right? Wouldn't it account for much more than that?
No, so like the gas part of the 20 is like, a little bit more than half of that 28%, 15% or something. And then baked into that 15% is some extremely conservative estimate of the global warming potential of the methane leaks. But as I said, it's lower in most of the jurisdictions where it's been studied. It's much lower. That inventory estimate is way lower than what the actual kind of global warming potential is in reality.
Okay, and we don't know what way is though, right?
No.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Another way of answering it, Tom, or another sort of way of looking at it, and is if you take if you stack up oil use and propane use and gas use, and when the utility and others will be very quick to tell you about the 24%, 25% emissions, carbon dioxide savings from burning gas instead of oil.
Yeah.
But if you factor in even a conservative estimate of the methane leakage, and then you add in the global warming potential of that and the damage it does to the atmosphere, on a system-wide basis, it would be worse than coal. So, we're not talking small potatoes. We're talking a pretty big impact just from a small amount of leakage.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
I have
Andrew?
one question for Hank and Matt. Hank just touched on a concept a minute ago that spurred some thoughts. He said that there's a cultural aspect to these changes. And I guess since there's something like 300,000 residences in Rhode Island, if you have nearly all of them on fossil fuels today, that's 300,000 personal decisions that have to happen at certain points in time. I live in Little Compton, which is not on National Grid's gas grid. So our options are electricity, home heating oil, and propane. And home heating oil and propane are 50 to 75% more expensive than an electric heat pump is here. But it does require, if you don't have one already, you have to make the positive choice to install one, go through the headache of a minor construction project. You basically have to do some things that are out of the ordinary. And in my usual badger self to my friends and neighbors, when trying to talk people into putting solar on their roof and switching to heat pumps, a good chunk of them say, well, it's going to cost money up front, and I don't know how long I'm going to live in this house. It's going to take 10 years to pay back. I think my job might move in 7 years, or who knows what will happen. And it seems like there's potentially a financing solution, but that's kind of complicated. But just about everyone says, I don't know if at resale I'll get this value back. And I've seen this idea floated elsewhere, but I don't know if you have strong thoughts on it. But what if at home sale, part of real estate disclosure was energy use? That would then get, that'd be big, bold numbers that mortgage lenders would see right away. And potentially, if you have an energy efficient house or you have solar panels on the roof producing electricity, netting out your costs, your mortgage terms could potentially be more favorable, therefore truly increasing the value of the home. Do you guys have strong thoughts on small things like that?
Good, interesting idea.
Yeah, that's something that you're definitely not the first one to ask about that, and it's a great question and a great comment. I think, I tend to think that any way you can bring information out is a great way to bring it, anything you can do to share that information. I think your point about kind of like all those 300,000 some odd homeowners are going to have to make a decision, and it has to be the path of least resistance for them. I think that kind of incentives, like thinking that you could increase the value of your home, like, are one thing, but then there's also kind of market transformation stuff that I think a lot of the bills that have been filed this session get at, that are more nuts and bolts. To me, I kind of see it as the foundation that needs to be put down before people can start to recognize the benefits of having these things in their houses, which will then translate into kind of different, consumer behavior at the end of the day. That's the hope. Hank?
Yeah, I mean, and it will be a lot of, there will be a lot of decisions, right? And luckily it's, it's going to roll out over several years, decade and a half, 2 decades. And so there's going to be opportunity for turnover as equipment, as appliances, reach the end of their useful life. So I think, culturally, it's just helpful for people to better understand their energy usage and the different components of that, rather than, just seeing the bill at the end of every month and, knowing that there might be some programs out there. Like, if we can incorporate that more into everyday understanding and more communications about the opportunities and how to sequence those things and get ahead of it, that'll be really helpful. Also, with some of these pieces of legislation and other things that the General Assembly could do, not having a utility incentivized to push for one solution for continued fossil fuel connections, or not having other companies pushing for maintaining fossil fuel equipment to the detriment of the opportunities for electric heat pumps. I think that's another big thing too, because you know, that's a lot of different communications from different sources that are all trying to keep fossil fuel you know, consumption going, where we know that the technology works for electric heat pumps. It's working lots of places colder than here, and it's the only feasible way to get to decarbonization. So it's just, you know, it's going to be tough, but that's what it's going to take.
This is an argument for the geogrid too. I mean, you know, like something like that, you know, by doing a bunch of homes at once, it would be hundreds of homes all at once, or buildings, you know. You can really kind of take big chunks out of the emissions every time you expand the geogrid, and it's set up in a modular way. So like you could do like, you know, you could do a geogrid on like around Brown University, and then like expand it to, and you know, down the hill into downtown, and then expand it across it. Like, you know, you can, you know, into Federal Hill, and like it's all the same pipeline, but you could just like take bites out of it. And that's where like kind of a diversity of options starts to be really important. If we're going to expeditiously do this, to just kind of like, you know, give everyone the tools, financial assistance, financing, the gas company, business model reform and stuff. Everyone has the tools to kind of go forth and do this.
Are either one of you aware of any kind of geological impediments to us doing geothermal? Because that was raised by our director of OER. He didn't quite say it like that, but he implied it. And I don't know if that's just, he seems totally down on the hydrogen path, but
just to restate again, I mean, Hank said this before, but I'll reiterate, is like green hydrogen, like I hope they do it. It's going to be great if they do it, and if they do, it's going to be so dumb to use it in buildings. I mean, they're going to need it for, you know, commercial air travel and long haul shipping and like industrial uses and all that stuff. It's like there's going to be so little of it, and it's going to be so expensive to use it in buildings. It's just going to be preposterous. But that being said, so the word geothermal is confusing because there's also a geothermal energy generation, like a geothermal power plant in places that have a lot of volcanic activity, like Iceland. They get all their energy from geothermal electric generation. And that's the situation where like you're going down really deep, and like there's seismic elements to it and stuff. These pipes only go down like 100 feet, which on a geological, you know, basis is like nothing. It's literally just like using the ground as a heat sink, and it's just no big deal.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So they're actually advancing with geothermal network pilots in Massachusetts, and National Grid is actually one of the companies doing that in Massachusetts. So I'll just observe, you know, our geology is not all that radically different from Massachusetts.
That it would be.
Right. Two, you know,
we'll let you know if Framingham explodes.
Yeah. Many of us, as part of that process, they're doing a lot of sharing sessions and trying to identify the right sites. And one of the things that I was talking to one of the engineering companies that's working on and developing this, actually hitting some bedrock is actually beneficial. I don't understand that, but he explained that because I had the same questions. And he said, no, actually it's beneficial to hit into bedrock, and for some reason, I don't know. And third, you know, many of us have water wells that go down the same depth. So if the geologic concerns were concerns only for, you know, heat pumps or geothermal heating, why weren't they raised when we all needed water at our homes out here? So just, again, I think taking things with a grain of salt and doing research is always good.
Always good. So I think we have about 5 minutes before this Zoom turns into a pumpkin. So we should probably wrap this up, but this conversation obviously has been very interesting, and I think we could spend a lot more time on it too. But I think we should probably close before Zoom just shuts us down.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This is the beginning of more conversations on this, I'm sure. So thank you all for joining us. I don't think the Climate Caucus will be back. We're going to do this thing on May 6th at Innovate Newport. And I'm sitting here thinking we probably will do maybe one in the beginning of June. Maybe that'll be our next time we aim for a meeting. We'll be at that event at Innovate Newport on June 6th and participating in that. And we'll put a mailing out on that for you folks that are on our mailing list. So we probably won't have another meeting until maybe 6 or 8 weeks.
Yes.
Good.
But
And if
thanks so
anybody has
much.
any ideas, excuse me, Terry, if anybody has any ideas about what they want us to talk about, like you, Tom, I know you're always on our calls. If there's something specific you want to hear, just let us know, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
put
sure.
some thought into it. Thank you.
Yeah, let us know what you
Yes.
want to talk about. And thank you
Absolutely.
to our reps, McGaw and Kislak, for joining us tonight, and to our guests.
Yeah,
Yes.
and thank you for letting me be an interloper from Providence. I learned a lot. Really
Good.
appreciate
No
Good.
problem. Anytime, Rebecca. So,
And
And I want to
uh,
shout out to Andrew for joining us from Little Compton as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, Andrew. Hank?
And I must apologize because earlier when I was shouting out how great the legislators were from Aquidneck Island and Providence, I was thinking, because I know Representative McGaw also has a part of Portsmouth, right? I was thinking I was catching that, but I remember you're in Little Compton, right? Or Tiverton?
I'm in Portsmouth also,
Oh.
Portsmouth, Tiverton, and
All
Little
right.
Compton.
All right, well, sorry. I want to make sure I praise everybody because you're all
You did.
fantastic. So
Thank you. Thank you for that.
all right. So we'll send out the recording for you all and for those that missed us, and the slide decks from our guests. And you're welcome to ask questions. We can put you in touch with our experts, I'm sure, or try to get the answers for you. And I guess with that, I would wish everybody a good night.
Have a good evening,
See you
everybody.
all soon.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
folks.